and we are live on Facebook.
Okay.
Good evening, everybody. I'm
Hey, Rawlson.
Hey, I just obviously ask everybody to go on mute because we are just about to start our program for our active transportation town hall for both wards 12 and ward 13. And so I'm very excited that both myself and Councillor Fleury, along with City of Ottawa staff and community partners, are here to answer questions about active transportation in wards 12 and 13 respectively. It's very exciting for us to do this because, as we know, our two wards are very interconnected, and we really can't look at one without the other in terms of pedestrians, in terms of cycling. So it is very important for us to be able to have this opportunity to be able to bring you together with staff so that we can actually speak more about the active transportation master plan, which is obviously a critical part of planning our city's green and mobile future. But we also want to ensure that residents have this opportunity to really express their opinions about active transportation in both of our wards. So we've solicited questions from residents ahead of time in order to make sure that staff could research and provide full responses. And we did receive dozens and dozens of questions, really far more than we can really address in this meeting. So staff will focus on the ones that have come up the most frequently. After the staff makes its presentations, we will have a breakout room session. So we will have multiple breakout rooms to discuss the presentation and to raise any additional items of interest. These breakout rooms will be moderated by either councillor staff or someone who would be a volunteer from our participating community organizations. And that's why we're also very excited tonight because we have a number of organizations joining us, including Bike Ottawa, Walkable Ottawa, Ottawa Disability Coalition, and Ecology Ottawa. So we will be soliciting information from those breakout groups, and we will gather that information for staff to review. And I also just wanted to provide a footnote before I go to Councillor Fleury, before I hand off this session to him, that my office as well will be working on a as we heard it report around specific issues that do impact Ward 13. I did promise during the election campaign that we would work on a ward-specific strategy around active transportation, and this will be a major component of that effort. But I want to once again thank you for joining us, and I want to pass over the virtual mic to my very esteemed colleague and friend, Councillor Fleury.
Thank you, Rawlson, and good morning. Bonjour à tous et à toutes. Merci de vous être joints en si grand nombre à la séance ce soir. This is an important session for both of our communities. I want to thank community groups, our community associations, as Rawlson highlighted, Ecology Ottawa, Bike Ottawa, Walkable Ottawa, the Ottawa Disability Coalition, a number of folks. So a couple of just elements for the session. So just for ease, I would ask everyone to stay muted. If you want to see who's going to speak, feel free to turn off your video so that we make it to the top of your screen. Je vous encourage tous à toutes, si vous voulez voir qui va parler ce soir, les employés et nos équipes, ils vont être en haut. Je vous encourage aussi à soumettre vos commentaires, vos suggestions à travers la présentation. Let me run you through how the session will work. So we are starting now with brief comments from Rawlson and I. We are going to get sort of top 10 fundamental questions that that city staff have received so far and are top of mind. We'll present that with a short presentation. We'll go out to breakout rooms. So each of you will be in a breakout room. We're trying to get as much of your feedback. We'll have leaders in those breakout rooms. And after that, we'll come back. Our leaders of the breakout room will share that feedback with us and we'll summarize next steps. As Rawlson, comme mon collègue l'a mentionné, on va écrire un rapport conjoint, puis évidemment, il va y avoir des éléments spécifiques pour chaque quartier. Mais on va écrire un rapport de ce qui a été soumis ce soir, évidemment, pour mieux informer la révision du plan de transport. So for ease of our team who's going to locate you in a breakout room shortly, if you could rename yourself. Alors, si vous allez dans une séance breakout room francophone, juste devant votre nom, donc si vous allez au bas de la feuille participant, puis vous allez sous votre nom, vous pouvez vous renommer. Puis je vous encourage fortement à mettre un astérix devant votre nom si vous voulez être dans un groupe francophone. Further, if you want to help us, I invite you at the last segment of your name to write if you're more interested in cycling, accessibility, walking, just to help as our teams are going to go into breakout sessions. So and for ease again of breakout rooms, I would ask Jerry from Ottawa Disability Coalition, Rob from Ecology Ottawa, Cheryl from Ecology Ottawa, Aaron from Bike Ottawa, Danielle from Bike Ottawa, Florence from Bike Ottawa, Barb from Bike Ottawa, Caroline from Walkable Ottawa, and then our team members just to write an M in front of their name, which is for moderation of the breakout session. OK, alors on est prêt. Je pense que tous les éléments ont été soulignés. I wanted to maybe preface, we're entering into an important stage. We're reviewing the Transportation Master Plan in coming months and coming years. And this is the first kind of kick discussion that we want to have. Rawlson and I are regularly involved with traffic calming, infrastructure projects that help our community. And I want you to know that we work well together. We work well together, we work well with community groups, and we work well with the city. Let me give you, as I've been elected now for 11 years, I have some history on where we started. And many of you might have an even longer history, but let me give you maybe some of my perspective from 10 years ago. 10 years ago, we were talking about major missing links. We were talking about a built environment that was simply a road network designed for cars, and safety concerns were emerging, right? There were incidents, there were deaths, there were serious safety issues. So many groups, Bike Ottawa, Walkable Ottawa, Ecology Ottawa, work closely, and community groups that work closely with the city and us to bring initiatives. And the city was trying to do what it could in terms of cycling. We saw some of the early measures with sharrows. We saw further measures with bike lanes identified without clear standards. And same thing with sidewalks. This is a session on active transportation. So the standards of sidewalk width, how we'd approach an intersections, how key intersections were looked at. Those were all things that had evolved. And what I would say is the public policy around Complete Street was the major demarcation point in our public policy environment. And I saw that a number of years ago, how that's come to be. Évidemment, plusieurs mesures par la suite se sont mises en branle avec les groupes d'accessibilité, avec des nouveaux standards, avec des nouvelles approches, puis avec beaucoup de projets qui ont été mis en branle. Laissez-moi vous en partager quelques-uns. I remember Sussex being redone and some of the cycling improvements along there. Beechwood, which is famous for its improvement and famous with its current challenges. MacArthur, lane reductions and cycling improvements. The Odawa Bridge, which really transformed access to both of our communities. The East-West Bikeway and the winter network, as well as the LRT multi-use pathway. Those are just kind of to brainstorm and bring that to the forefront in terms of our conversation this evening. Opportunities remain, they will continue to remain, and we need to be hyper-focused, and that's the type of information we're looking for this evening. As we rebuild the infrastructure, that's our single most important point to do it right, to do it with the right policies and the right environment, and to make sure that those standards, those newer standards, those more urban modern standards are upheld and implemented. So Rawlson, I think I'll stop it here. We have I sort of wanted to tease the conversation. I wanted to give maybe a political lens to where we've started, where we need to go, what we can do. There's a number of elements which are official, right? The Transportation Master Plan, which will be an official document and will have influence on how our network is built out over the next number of years. There's also upgrades, right? When you think of our standards upgrade, modernization of sidewalk, when you think of the hyper-focus missing links that we hear often about. So we have a number of city staff that have joined us for this evening's session. Vous allez voir pour la présentation, ce sera sensiblement en anglais. On va pouvoir faire suite à vous avec les diapos en français. Je vous invite certainement à mettre vos commentaires, vos suggestions dans le chat. La séance est enregistrée. This session is recorded so that if someone couldn't join, they will we can share, but also so that we can Rawlson and I and the city team can ensure that all of your feedback this evening is properly captured and that we can advance towards our next step, which is the beginning of the Transportation Master Plan review. So I'd invite the city team. I know a number of them are here. We have Zlatko, we have Phil Landry, we have Deborah, we have Adam Hortop, we have Katarina. So I guess I'll turn it over now to Zlatko to introduce the city team, begin the presentation on the top questions we've received so far, and then the next agenda item is we'll be going to breakout rooms.
Thank you, councillors. So I'm happy to be here this evening and share some updates on our active transportation plan, both progress and where we're heading in terms of updating the plan. We do have other members of the active transportation team with us today, including one additional member, Katarina Tretkovic, who is looking after the Saint Laurent EA, which is an important project in the future. We also have Phil Landry, who's the Director of Traffic Services. And so he'll be speaking to areas that are more in the domain of his area. We have Adam Hortop, who is focused on a lot of projects in wards 12 and 13. And also Deborah Lightman, who's doing a little bit more, I would say, on the policy work related to the active transportation and the TMP update. So I hope I haven't forgotten anyone. Phil, I'm not sure if you wanted to mention anything before we started.
Thanks, Zlatko. Yeah, I just wanted to say hi to everybody and looking forward to the discussion tonight. So maybe with that, we can get started with the presentation and go from there.
All right, so we'll start off talking about where we are in the update of our active transportation plan, which is a part of the entire TMP, Transportation Master Plan update. For those of you that have been looking into this area for a long time, you might remember the first plans for cycling and pedestrians came out in 2008 and 2009. And then the next pair of plans, both cycling and pedestrian, was in 2013. So those are still in force, and we are now in the process of doing the updates. That's a much bigger gap than perhaps we had anticipated when we did the 2013 plans. And that's primarily because we wanted to wait to the right time to take an origin destination survey, which is our key tool for measuring what's happening out there from a transportation behaviors point of view. And we did not anticipate COVID a few years ago, so that caused some additional delay. So if you look at the slide, you'll see we've been working on this for quite some time, and it's a very deliberate process where we talk about the scope and we start sharing some of the high-level goals with the public. We get feedback on every single phase. The most recent phase that we went out for feedback on was in the fall of last year, and it was a MetroQuest type pushpin map, web-based survey. And we received something like 4,200 different individual comments all over the city. So at this point, we're taking that input along with lots of other input, including, of course, what we hear tonight. And we're going to present the list of projects, both cycling and pedestrian, for the next 10-year plan. We hope to do that sometime this fall. The plan itself only gets finalized along with the TMP. We think currently we're looking at the end of 2023. So that was about a 10-year period since the last plan. I mentioned that we got a lot of feedback from the survey we did in the fall of last year. And so this gives you a little perspective in this part of the town we're interested in. So you can see the various push pins are things like missing links and sidewalk or pedestrian or cycling problems. So if you're familiar with that cluster of push pins here, this is around the Mackenzie and Revito node and the ramp that comes up from Daly. One of the questions we often get is, how do we pick projects? So we do actually start off, we have a consultant team that looks at first principles that were provided to them in terms of what our objectives are to scan the city and identify projects. But then we also are certainly going to be reaching out and getting input as we are today. It was very important to get councillor input on priorities, because that, as I have mentioned in other forums, is really the challenge, is not to find worthwhile projects, but just to decide collectively which are the ones that are both feasible and most important to do in the next 10 years. Then the prioritization and screening goes on, and then the project list we hope to share in September. We've made a lot of progress in certainly since the last planning period. We first of all have seen very good growth in the number of cycling trips. This is basically within Ward 11 through 18 inclusive, and that's where we have the bulk of our full-time counters for cycling. So this is growth in cycling. So it ends up being about a 78% increase in terms of what we've measured over that period of time. There's obviously a certain statistical confidence level. That's what that means, is we think it's accurate within the boundary shown. Councillor Fleury mentioned the Odawe crossing, and I think he used the term transformative. And actually, I have heard that from a number of people. It's really changed the way they feel they can get around, and so it's been a really excellent and extremely well used facility. We have a bike and pedestrian counter there. But I also wanted to mention that the initiative we did on Hemlock was proving out in terms of usage. So this is the number of cycling trips on a weekly basis. And you can see, if you compare 2014 to 2015, that there's some pretty dramatic increases in cycling rate. Excuse me. And the other thing that I'd want to say about Hemlock is that we see far more balanced cycling on weekends and off-peak compared with the commuting peaks than we do in just about any other counter in the city. So I think the facility is being used for all kinds of trip purposes. In the terms of physical progress, this area map shows all the projects that have been done since 2013. So actually the vast bulk of cycling facilities and a number of significant pedestrian improvements, particularly PXOs, have happened since the last plan. So there's been a real focus in these two wards in terms of making improvements. Now that's sort of facilities that are now complete, but in the pipeline before the next plan kicks in, we also have a number of other initiatives, which you can see in a sort of a blue color, that we hope to get done in that time frame that are independent of the next plan. So in other words, we intend or expect that these things will be done before the plan starts. So if you were to overlay those two, you would see that it's a fairly dramatic change over 10 years' time. There were a massive number of questions that were forwarded, and so thanks to some help from the councillor's office staff, we did pick a few that I will speak to. Myself and Phil Landry will speak to them depending on what the question covers. So how do we come up with the target for modal share, which is basically looking at the all travel related trips? You know, let's say, for example, if you look at a typical fall day and ask the question, by what mode do people travel? Do they take the bus? Do they drive their car, and so on? And so in the 2013 time horizon, we came up with a 10% pedestrian share, which was not really very different than the measured pedestrian modal share around that time, because the pedestrian numbers don't change really quickly. They have to do with the way the city's built out and develops. The cycling modal share was thought of as being a fairly aggressive goal of 5% citywide, compared with under 2% at the time. And we did also break out a separate number inside the green belt of 8%, which would have put us fairly high up in the North American rankings. Now, going forward, first of all, we have the energy evolution study that was approved by council, and it's recommending that we aim for 11% for pedestrian and 11% cycling. And then the TMP, which was going to be wrapped up in 2023, but would apply in 2024, will be the main document setting the modal share, because we can't set the targets for one mode without looking at the whole pie. And that number is going to be also, it's very important to get a good baseline across the city, which we're only going to get when we do our origin destination survey, the next one. So that's why the modal share numbers won't be developed until later in the process. The question about COVID-19, when we are doing our plan, we expect to be past the very significant reality of COVID today. I mean, we're in lockdown. However, and so the fundamentals of the plan really don't change. We don't expect them to be different after COVID. However, we are looking at a number of scenarios for expected, like there could be some permanent changes that occur after the transition. Some things are going to move faster than they have before in terms of people's behaviors. And so we're going to track that very closely and try to be more flexible in how we respond with our transportation options within the TMP. So it's a question which I think relates to the kind of facilities, the quality of facilities that we are building. And we have certainly made a strong shift recently into protected facilities. I think the Laurier bike lane was our big breakthrough. Apart from multi-use pathways that we're all familiar with, Laurier was the first one where we had a physical protection along a main road. And then the city's also been very active in the standard setting. And so we are definitely pushing into protected intersections and bike tracks. And you can experience some of the first ones we built in a number of places in the city. For example, we have protected intersection at St. Laurent and Donald, and many more are in the pipeline. So the objective is we know that the next cohort of residents that we want to join us in cycling and walking more do not want to mix with traffic, and they want safe places to cross roads and be protected more from traffic than they are today. In terms of how we implement active transportation facilities, of course, this plan that's in place now from 2013, as well as the new plan, put money and targeted projects to help patch missing links and so on. But I think one of the biggest changes that's happened over the last 10 years is all kinds of other projects, resurfacing, road rebuild, are bringing dramatic new changes and new facilities. I mean, great examples in this area are, for example, the Montreal Road rebuild, which is going to bring bike tracks into play very soon, in a year or so. Another example is the CSST, the great big pipe that we use to store stormwater runoff. It delivered a new pathway segment close to Stanley Park, as well as a little bike track segment on Cumberland between Wilbrod and Stewart. And those are, that was just for a water treatment project. So all across the city, there's everything we do, people ask the question, is there some way to improve the active transportation environment? There's a question about improving links to St. Laurent Station, and that is a very, very tough place to reach from public property. So we've looked hard at making a link from Michael, and that's to the east of the station. It's barely possible, and we're hoping to collect some land over time to see if that can be done in the future. We also, Katerina, who's on the call, is looking at an EA along St. Laurent. And well, we can't say yet exactly what's possible. Certainly there'll be an attempt to improve those conditions for both cyclists and pedestrians where possible. And also, many of you are aware that the mall itself has pretty dramatic plans for redevelopment, because they have a lot of land just to the west of, well, adjacent to their property. However, all that's on hold. Obviously the retail sector has been dramatically impacted by COVID, but once that restarts, we'll be looking very hard at it, working really closely with them to get a much improved link to the northwest from that mall. So that's probably the best that we can foresee in the coming future in terms of improvements. There was a question about the Byward Market. So some of you may be aware that there's a public realm plan that was recently done and recently approved by committee and council. And it really does have a lot of transformation in pedestrian areas within the market area. And so I don't think that there is necessarily going to be a dramatic change in, let's say, cycling facilities through the market. However, that being said, we have a number of projects around the market to improve connectivity to the market that have been highlighted there. There's the new bike track along Revito, which Councillor Fleury strongly championed. We are looking to make an improvement on the ramp that connects Mackenzie to Daly and the canal pathway. There's also been small improvements along Cumberland. I mentioned the small bike track to the south, but we're also going to make a better connection to the Minto Bridge crossing at the north end. we're doing a study of improving the crossing at York Street, and that was Councillor Fleury had a Section 37 funded initiative to help with that. And in addition, we do expect to get a better connection from the MUP that goes along the LRT pathway to the south, to the Revito River, and connected up to the Mackenzie King Bridge. So in the next plan, I think that we can start looking at can we do anything else on Cumberland, and perhaps make some improvements on Murray.
Okay, so I'll take over
so
this.
So the next questions I'll hand over, Phil.
Thanks, Latko. Everyone can hear me, I assume? Okay, so these are tied, this question 5 was tied to about pedestrian crossings on King Edward and Dalhousie, specific to traffic signals. So there was a few locations identified. So I had my team look at this over the last couple of days. At King Edward and Templeton, the current operations is that there's a pedestrian recall in all times. So it means it runs basically fixed time cycles continuously. We also will be putting in ladder markings later this spring. In terms of some of the recommendations to enhance pedestrian and cycling safety in the area, we use different pedestrian clearance times depending on the location and things like that. So we did look at the clearance times at this location, and it was about 1.1 meters per second. So we reduced that to 1 meter per second, which will change the flash to walk from 17 seconds to 19 seconds. We're also going to do some field studies later this year, assuming Ottawa goes back to school in the fall, to make sure that the pedestrians are crossing, and if all that are arriving are able to get across during one crossing, and if need be, we can adjust timings. We did look at the collision history, and there have been 2 incidents involving pedestrians crossing at that location. So we're also going to look at leading pedestrian indicators. So that's basically where we give 5 seconds of walk where the light still stays red for for vehicles, to get the pedestrians a little more visible out in the intersection. So that'll be will be done later this spring. Next slide, Taco. So we're also asked to look at King Edward and Revito. So currently that signal also operates fixed time. There is already a 5-second leading pedestrian interval for all directions. We've also put in ladder markings. We have a bunch of turn prohibitions, both for left turns, no right turns on reds, westbound movement, and the eastbound left turn movement is fully protected, which means that vehicles can only turn left with the arrow and not on a green ball. So we have verified that the signal time at those the intersection. And so we are looking at that. We did monitor. We do have a traffic camera at that intersection, so we did monitor and to make sure over the last couple of days there's no issues with pedestrians crossing, and we didn't see anything in terms of a pedestrian who arrived and left when the walk was on. They could get across the intersection. But we will take a look at that in a little more detail. We could do some detailed studies to confirm that. Next slide, Slacko. And then we also asked to look at in the market York and Dalhousie, Clarence and Dalhousie. So those 2 intersections run fixed time. The review of the collisions are noted on the screen. There was 1 involving a pedestrian at York and Dalhousie, 3 at Clarence and Dalhousie. There's also 2 other intersections along the corridor that do have a 5-second leading pedestrian interval. So what we're recommending here is to do that 5-second leading pedestrian interval in all directions at these 2 other intersections. So we have over 1,200 traffic signals in the city. We do time them differently, and through our road safety action plan, we're going to be making other changes to signals. I know the red revert's a big issue for people, so that change is going to occur where we'll be able to, if you at intersections, especially in this area where there's a lot of cycling, and that if you arrive and the light turns to amber and it goes to red, the light won't go back to green. If someone gets off the detector, it'll continue to the next phase. We're also looking at intersections where today we have concerns where a pedestrian arrives, but the light's already turned green and the solid hands is on. So the walk doesn't come up because they haven't pressed the push button. So we're going to be implementing again, locations in this area because of the way the area is, where if the vehicle was detected, it would also bring up the walk display. So those two things, so we're going to work with the councillors in terms of locations, but I know, I think Beechwood's going to be one corridor where we're going to have that in place. I would expect Montreal Road, MacArthur, those type of roads where you've got a lot of activity going on. So those are some of the things specific to these were the questions were brought forward, but if there's any other locations or intersections where there's concerns, feel free to let us know either through the councillor's office or through 311, and then we will review those and get back to you. So,
well, Phil, I think just for everyone's sake, as Phil is presenting, feel free to feed the chat on those locations, and we'll pull that in our summary as well. So
yeah, and I also say we've also working with the councillors, work proactively to look at intersections and corridors. I know we've made changes to some where we have it activate fixed time or during certain times of day, especially with near schools and things like that. So we're very open to looking at those areas, and actually through our road safety action plan, there's we got our through council's commitment to this, we were given a resource to look specifically at how we operate and time signals and make adjustments in terms from a road safety perspective. So we have a staff member that's in place, and last year they looked at the leading pedestrian interval at I think it was 150, 200 intersections near schools. So that was the focus last year, to look at that. And then they'll be expanding the work into other areas where there's a lot of concentration of pedestrians and cyclists. So I think next slide, I think that's what I have to say on that at this point.
Okay, thank you, Phil. The next question we'll cover was a question about improving cycling conditions on Beechwood. So I think there are some side streets that might be good prospects to put in the active transportation plan, but other streets that have been resurfaced have also had improvements made to them that connect to Beechwood. Along Beechwood, we have made a decision to proactively make a change in the way the road works to add cycling, and then use opportunities for development to improve the quality of those facilities. It's not just the fact that there's work being done when new developments come in, but the city also gets 2.5 meters of additional public right-of-way on development applications of a certain size. And so that's what makes it possible. You'll see there on the first image was, I think it was just immediately to the east of 222 Beechwood, where we had an extension of a bike track with a PXO. This is the newest section of bike track, again, eastbound in front of St. Charles Market, I think it's called. And also we're going to be looking at ways we can improve the parking along the curb with a bike lane painted that goes around the parking. We've had a lot of comments from cyclists about with the need of traffic to meander in and out. It's a bit uncomfortable, particularly at the beginning and end of these facilities. So we're looking at those kinds of improvements to see what can be done.
Okay, so this is back to me. So this could signalize pedestrian crossing between the Vanier Park, on the Vanier Parkway between Beechwood and Mayor Private be installed. So the distance between the two intersections is about 500 meters. There are sort of two pathway links. They're not facing each other. The first one's on the west side, maybe about 150, 200 meters north of Beechwood. North of Mayor Private, and then maybe another 50 to 100 meters, there's a little sidewalk link to get into the community on the east side. So we did review back in 2017 the warrants. So we do use the warrants to identify intersections with traffic lights. And so there it meant 1% warranted, and that's not very surprising considering it's not a very comfortable area to be crossing. So what we're going to do is we're going to do another count later this summer because we expect in the summer is probably the busiest time. And we're also going to see how many pedestrians are there and trying to see if it can get closer to the warrants, to achieving that warrants. So that's where that one's at.
Zlatko, question number 8. What are the plans for Hemlock future design, including integration with Saint Laurent Aviation Pathway or Parkway and Montreal Road?
Yes, that's obviously a major development that's partially built out, Water Ridge. They haven't quite got to, let's say, the north part of the development yet, but this is part of the site plan that was approved. And you'll see the red line here calls for cycle tracks. So that includes a section of Hemlock that runs up to meet effectively Saint Laurent. So the idea is that we will be discussing it with the developer very soon in order to start the process of figuring out the details of what it's going to look like. We obviously have a good idea of the kind of quality of cycling and pedestrian facilities we expect, and the NCC will also be involved in that discussion. That location of Hemlock and Saint Laurent is the beginning of the scope for the transit priority EA that Katarina is working on, and so we'll see whether or not that somehow can tie in with that intersection as well. There's a question on the St. Patrick Bridge. There is a renewal coming up, and there's already have been discussions about can we improve cycling conditions. Generally, if at all possible, if we do a significant rehab of any bridge, we'd like to have raised facilities for cyclists, and that oftentimes will improve the protection for pedestrians as well. This is going to be very challenging technically on that bridge, so I don't think it's clear we can do it. But in any case, that's going to be a very big part of the initial phase where we try to see what other benefits we can get from the bridge rehab apart from just the life cycle. And at the very least, we're going to have a good look at this very sharp curb transition that happens in the eastbound direction right as you transition to the so-called jug handle. Now, the final question was on the strong request we've heard from the community for an underpass to connect the two NCC pathways along the east side of the Revito River and basically go underneath the Cummings Bridge. Now, one comment I'll make is that the last bullet point there is that we do intend to do a feasibility study because it isn't clear that for lots of reasons that is even going to be a feasible proposition, but nevertheless, let's find out. And I think, Phil, you may wish to talk about the questions of safety.
Yeah, so I think, I mean, one of the big things is with the reconstruction of Montreal Road, it's changed how that intersection is going to operate moving forward compared to where it was 2-3 years ago before the construction occurred. So there's been some major changes done to try to narrow the crossings and also to provide areas for cyclists and pedestrians. So in terms of the collision data, so this goes back from 2014 to 2018. There were 2 collisions involving pedestrians at the intersections. There was no cycling or no fatal collisions. And I know this had been talked about, and it came up as a result of the work that we did under the bridge at the Bank Street Bridge at Riverside, where we were able to work with the NCC and put that little underpass. And so that was constructed a few years ago. Prior to the construction, there was, I believe, 5 pedestrians that were in collisions. There was 4 cyclists, and the majority of them were the people just heading north-south along Riverside Drive. So that one was done, and I don't have the data right now, but I would expect that because there's a lot less people just from observing the intersection going through there. So we will look. Fortunately, at that location, there was room under the bridge between the bridge abutments and the river to put that facility in. And so that'll be part of the examination, in this case at this location, to see if that's also doable. So from that perspective, I think generally there's been improvements just with the reconstruction, and we'll take a look at the viability of the underpass moving forward.
Thank you, Phil. And I believe there's also going to be some counts done as well in that intersection as it gets completed. So I think we're getting near the end. This might be the last one, but the question was about widening. The NCC most definitely has been looking at their practices in terms of congestion on their pathways, and they do have guidelines internally on when they widen them. Of course, that's subject to feasibility as well. But from the city's perspective, as our on-road network becomes more extensive, more complete, and higher quality, we're already seeing, as we've seen along the Ottawa River, a considerable shift of cyclists that are, find the city facilities more direct or faster. And that takes a lot of the pressure off of the NCC facilities. And in this area as well, there's at least a couple of initiatives that hope to do the same thing in terms of, one way to solve congestion on the pathways is to provide alternate paths as the number of cyclists grows. So the question on sidewalks in residential areas, within the active transportation plan, the bulk of the dollars for the pedestrian part of the plan, and that's nominally around $2.5 million a year, goes to add brand new sidewalks along roadways that might have been decades old, but in those times, the design guidance did not, for whatever reason, include sidewalks. And so we have a way to prioritize those. And within this next AT plan update, there will be another set of sidewalks that will be selected all over the city. Going forward, we sure don't want to add to that backlog of missing sidewalks. And so we're going to update the policies, and this is in the official plan, so that one side of all streets, including local streets, has a sidewalk as we build out our new developments. But that's certainly not the only way that sidewalks get added. The road renewal, even if we resurface a road, will improve the sidewalks. We have ways to calm traffic in neighborhoods, which improves conditions for pedestrians, even if there's no sidewalks. And also the PXO program has really been dramatically rolled out. I think we have maybe 130 or 40 already, even though the program is only a few years old. And that's very, very helpful to help pedestrians cross roads. All right, well, thank you very much. I'll hand it over to the councillors for the next step.
Merci beaucoup, Zlatko. Thank you, Zlatko, Phil, and the city team. This was kind of the rapid fire on a number of questions that were received so far. as part of both Rawlson and I's work when we pull the As We Heard It. None of your questions, even if they were pre-submitted but not raised this evening, will go unmissed. We'll pull that in our summary. And I'm seeing the chat being filled, so certainly appreciate it. Comme mentionné auparavant, la présentation que vous avez vue, évidemment, pour aise de Zoom, vous l'avez en anglais, mais d'ici la fin de la semaine, on va vous envoyer et la version PDF anglais et français pour tous et toutes. So our teams are working magic. I want to thank the city team for presenting. Now, Stephanie from Rawlson's team, as well as Charles from my team, will be working their magic to send you to the breakout rooms. It's your last chance. If you made a decision on you prefer cycling or pedestrian discussion, please write at the end of your name pedestrian or cycling. Si vous voulez en français, ajoutez l'astérix. On va se revoir dans une quinzaine de minutes, 15-20 minutes. So, hey, you've made it back. Okay, good to see you. We're just going to give everyone a second here. We're still waiting on one or two of the groups. En attendant, super belle participation, incroyable. Une 80 plus personnes qui se joignent à nous ce soir. Là, on va avoir beaucoup de contenu, beaucoup d'informations, beaucoup d'idées. Donc, je vous remercie tous et toutes de votre temps ce soir. I really want to thank you this evening. I was jumping from group to group, and each group had, I wanted to stay and engage. So there's a lot of great conversation that's happened this evening. Okay. Stephanie, do you want to give me a little thumbs up when all the groups are back? I think we're still down maybe a few.
I think we might have lost some folks during the breakout sessions, but it seems like everyone's back now.
Excellent. Okay, great. So thanks, everyone. Thank you to our moderators, volunteer moderators who've helped us. So I hope that each group was able to get through the two key questions, just general sense of the presentation that Zlatko and Phil were able to give, and just refocusing a bit of our strategy where we need to bring attention to. So what we'll do is we'll give us another, I'm going to do my best to moderate within the next 10 to 15 minutes, go over each group. Moderators, if you could give us, I know it's hard because you want to bring every point, but please give us a sample of what was discussed. I encourage everyone to continue to feed the chat as conversations happen. And obviously that will help us inform the session. Rawlson, do you want to kickstart with the moderator?
Absolutely. Well, I think I'll pick on Aaron from Bike Ottawa to begin with.
It's always the last name that starts near the beginning that gets called on first. Thanks. So we had an interesting discussion about cycling, and there's a few themes that I would say emerged. Not to read too much into it, but there's obviously some good east-west links throughout the Vanier Overbrook area, for example. But people kind of raise that there's a need for potentially a north-south route between the Aviation Parkway and North River Road. So something, for example, from the area of Beechwood and Marier up to the Max Keeping Bridge. And that this could also, be a useful, winter maintained north-south link, as the others are not part of that network. And, just following from the, there's a sense that not just with winter, but with many other things, there's a need for greater maintenance. I mean, obviously, Beechwood, there is an issue with winter maintenance that can be highly uneven, right? As a route that, it's part cycle track, part on road. The actual standard of what happens can vary, but also just in general that making sure that the infrastructure we have, is well maintained for potholes and paint markings and the like. Maybe a little bit less of a transportation master plan issue, but something that maybe informs that that kind of calculus. And I think there was a desire to see more uniform infrastructure being built. Once again, Beechwood probably kind of informs that as redevelopment has happened, we've seen cycle tracks going in some places. But even just, even if there is, those differing, types where, you might transition from cycle track to on-road bike lane, maybe making sure that, that infrastructure follows a line so that you're not weaving around parked cars, for example, and that, you're following the curb line and it's predictable for all users, which makes it safer for all users at the end of the day. And finally, just some concern that, the multi-use paths in the area, that I think we discussed, for example, around the Revito River and North River Road, but also, some of the cycle tracks are being built or maybe not being built wide enough and are quickly becoming congested that, some bike lanes, for example, they might be fine on opening day, but what are they going to look like in 10 years, right? Because in a lot of instances, they're not wide enough that you can have even two people riding next to each other. So capacity is also a major issue.
Really, really great. So let's build on to that. We'll now go to Jerry. Jerry, are you able to?
Sure. Well, I'll quickly say that we were concerned and people were concerned in the room. There was only 5 of us altogether. We were concerned that there weren't a lot of people around that were concerned about pedestrians and accessibility, on that. So hopefully in some of the other chat rooms, there was a lot of discussion about that. There was a concern raised that cyclists were getting all of the infrastructure built and stuff like that, and all up front, and so the cyclists really didn't care too much about pedestrians. And I had to clarify a little bit that a couple of weeks ago, it was the cyclists that approached the Ottawa Disability Coalition to see if we can work together to improve intersections and cycling paths and everything like that. So yes, I believe that cyclists do care about pedestrians and that. So I hope that we can continue to work together on that part. The main concerns, I guess, raised were that because of on the pedestrian side, that there were a lot of changes made that, like with the new bridge, that the 808 bridge ended up putting a lot of pedestrians moving down Donald Street and stuff like that. But there's also a huge volume of vehicles going down Donald Street, and that just because of all the other changes and that were happening, and that's an example of where when you make a change in one thing in a system, everything else around it can also be affected very, very greatly, and so there seems in our group that there was a lack of integration of a lot of plans, that when they're looked at, they don't look at everything, and they don't look at a longer term of where things are going. And that, so with this intensification coming down the road, around LRT stations and everything like that, there is a major concern for the pedestrians, where there's going to be a whole lot more pedestrians, not a lot more infrastructure for them to work with, and not a lot of infrastructure for the cars to drive on and for the cyclists to go through, and so the concern is bringing into the transportation master plan and the official plan the safety and convenience and that of pedestrians, to make sure that they're considered now before all of the building is done, and that. So there wasn't any individual projects that we were talking about. It was more this, looking forward down the road, making sure that the integration is done for all the way across the board for cyclists and pedestrians.
Is it fair to say that planning development, planning preferred corridors is kind of the theme of your working group?
Right.
Okay. Okay, no, I've captured that. Rawlson, do you want to? Thank you, Jerry, and thank you to the group. Anything else before? Anything else, Jerry, on with your group?
No, that's good.
Okay, Rawlson.
Well, thank you, Jerry. We're also taking notes in our office, and I think next I'll call on Cheryl to give a report.
Thanks very much. I will try to keep it brief as possible. We had a mixed group of cyclists and pedestrians, which actually turned out really well because we had a great discussion in kind of broad strokes about everything active transportation, which was excellent. So I guess the big question that everyone wanted to know the answer to was how the city balances the needs of pedestrians versus the needs of cyclists. And this idea that we're all fighting for space that we're trying to take away from cars. And a really great suggestion was made of the city writing on paper what the policy is for the priority being, for example, as was given, cyclists, pedestrians up here, let's say public transport, let's say cyclists, cars all the way down here. And the idea of just having it concrete, no, not concrete, but paper would be really helpful for a lot of people, I think. It was noted that there is no integration between city and the NCC, and it would be very helpful for a lot of residents who have issues with areas around their neighborhoods if they could deal with one set of institutions. So a little bit more cooperation, coordination would be great if that's possible. An excellent point was made that there seems to be no policy from the city in terms of making sure that active transportation is encouraged around schools, which we all think should be occurring and isn't necessarily. So yeah, some movement in the right direction on that would be great. A quite specific point about the counting that was mentioned, Zlatko was talking about counting in the presentation. And there was a concern that sometimes crossings are not used by pedestrians because they're actually too dangerous to try to get across before the onslaught of cars hit them. And so perhaps counting isn't necessarily representative, and then thinking about other ways that we could be determining this modal share, which is quite important. So maybe we could have a think about some other determining factors. And my final big topic or theme was that other cities around the world use overpasses a lot more than Ottawa does. So perhaps we could think about making sure that pedestrians do have a safe way of crossing the road. I hope that I've done our group justice, but it was a really great discussion, and I'll just say thanks very much for opening this session this evening. It was really great.
Well, thank you, Cheryl, for that. Being an avid pedestrian before going to City Hall and actually walking to work, and that was one of the ways I got to know many people in Overbrook. I have to say I do appreciate the comments that you made, as well as the comments just generally tonight around safety. You know, I understand a lot of the challenges around the intersections, around even just the lack of infrastructure in some of our neighborhoods for pedestrians. And so I really do appreciate those comments. I'll toss it back over to Matt.
Thanks, Rawlson. Thank you, Cheryl. Next up, we'll go to Florence.
Ok, j'ai pas oublié de mettre mon micro. Il y a des commentaires qui ont été... Je vais un peu répéter ce qu'on a entendu tout à l'heure, mais en résumé, un des commentaires qui a été donné, c'est que la vitesse est rarement mentionnée par la ville comme un point qu'on doit considérer dans la planification, alors que c'est un problème pour les piétons comme pour les cyclistes. D'autres points qui ont déjà été mentionnés, c'est le problème de lien manquant entre des bouts d'infrastructure. On était plus côté piéton que cycliste, mais de l'infrastructure qui commence, qui s'arrête, etc. Par exemple, quand on arrive du pont Adaway, puis qu'on arrive sur Donald, il y a un bout de piste, après il n'y a plus rien. Ce serait bon que la ville fasse, quand on fait, qu'on construit une infrastructure pour les vélos en particulier, mais c'est qu'on fasse une rue au complet plutôt que de faire des bouts, qu'on attende qu'il y ait la construction et qu'on fasse juste des bouts d'infrastructure avec des liens qui manquent. Donc, on est en sécurité un bloc, on l'est plus le suivant, etc. Donc, ce serait plus sécuritaire pour tout le monde qu'on fasse toute une rue en même temps. Bon, Beechwood est un exemple, mais il y en a d'autres. Pour ce qui est des piétons, on a pas mal parlé du temps qu'il faut pour, avant de pouvoir traverser et du temps qu'il faut pour traverser. Donc, on aimerait voir que le temps qu'il faut pour traverser soit plus long parce que tout le monde ne traverse pas rapidement. Un exemple qui était donné, c'était à Saint-Charles et Beechwood, où il y a beaucoup d'écoliers, de jeunes qui passent et qui ne traversent pas forcément très rapidement, ou même des personnes âgées plus loin sur Beechwood, et puis qu'on raccourcisse le temps qu'on doit attendre pour pouvoir traverser comme piéton. Deux autres points, puis je terminerai avec ça. On a parlé aussi de construction, de tours à logement, par exemple sur Rideau. La construction, la densification, ça veut dire plus de circulation à tout point de vue. Plus de voitures notamment, ce qui met à risque les gens qui circulent à pied et à vélo. Et puis la dernière chose, c'est qu'on aimerait ne pas voir refaire les mêmes erreurs que dans la rue Elgin. Donc là, je ne vous ferai pas un dessin, tout le monde comprend comment ça marche dans la rue Elgin. Des intersections qui ont été données, juste pour vous donner un exemple, mais c'était Donald Vanier, Montréal, Promenade Vanier, King and Wood, Saint Andrews, et puis Cobourg et Saint-Patrick. Je vais m'en arrêter là. Si quelqu'un de mon groupe pense que j'ai oublié quelque chose, je ne peux pas tout répéter ce qui se dit, mais faites-moi signe, mais je pense que c'était à peu près ça.
Parfait. Merci beaucoup, Florence. J'ai un des thèmes que tu as soulevé, speeding management. I thought that was a very interesting point that wasn't raised so far. Not that the others weren't, but that I think is speeding management, being forefront about speeding issues, design issues, and objectives there. Rawlson, I'll throw it back to you.
And I'll call on Barbara to provide a report.
Hi, thank you. So our group was officially considered a biking group, but we talked about biking and walking because often you end up being a pedestrian at some point, right? So one of the concerns that was raised that actually just also popped up in the chat here again is revert reds and trying to get the traffic lights to recognize you when you're on a bicycle. And that there's no uniform way throughout the ward or even throughout our city to know that you are being recognized. And how is the city going to prioritize that to make it easier for people to get through the intersection safely? I think I see here, Anna left a comment. Those, we refer to them as revert reds when you think the light is changing and then it doesn't actually change on you. So that was a concern discussed in our group. The other concern, which I think is being echoed everywhere, is the amount of space everyone is sharing, whether they're on a bike or whether they're walking or on a scooter. We had discussions about different kinds of scooters, motorized wheelchairs, and just the amount of congestion when you're forced to share the space, and discussions of if there's a bike lane, but there's also a multi-use path, why are people biking in the multi-use path and not on the bike lane, if it's a painted bike lane, and those kinds of things. And the discussion being, how do we get more room as our numbers continue to grow and as the city focuses more on having active transportation as the choice to be made, and making that a desirable and comfortable decision to make. So I think that's one. And added to onto that is, how do we join parts of the city, right? We have these large pieces, but getting from one piece to another, how do we make that a comfortable transition for people to use, is also a concern. There was also discussion of maintenance to the roads themselves. Often we hear people talk about potholes in connection to driving, but how are potholes or sewer maintenance and things like that being done with biking in mind? Because the size of a pothole that you can handle on a bike is very different than the size of a pothole you can handle in a car. And the suggestion was, can we have a sort of almost a cycling lens when we're dealing with those holes? They might come and deal with ones that seem very large and leave what appear to be small in a driver perspective, but on a bicycle still ends up being something where you can hit that at the wrong angle with your tire and end up in a problematic situation, shall we say. And one of the questions that we had near the end, which we didn't quite have enough time to go into, is if we're talking about a modal shift throughout the city, how are we going to do that in an equitable way? Who is going to decide which wards get what and where the funding goes, and how is that going to be made a transparent process for everyone? Because some wards already have more infrastructure than others, some wards have more sidewalks than others, more bike lanes and those things. And so how are we going to make sure that equity is taken into account throughout this process?
Thank you, Barbara, for that. There are many themes that I'm preoccupied with that your group was talking about, definitely around the different modalities. Often it seems like there's cars and then there's everybody else in terms of our complete streets, and everybody else kind of gets this and then cars gets this. And obviously that's a challenge. The other challenge that I've heard about is equity. And I think the good news is talking with staff, I think they understand that too. I'm, as you know, am preoccupied, with many files around equity. And I think of Overbrook, a neighborhood with, socioeconomic demographic that really is dependent on active transportation and lacks active transportation infrastructure, such as basic infrastructure, such as sidewalks. So these are issues that definitely are of concern to me, and thank you for raising them. And we're going to definitely ensure that those ideas are captured. So I'll pass it back over to Matt.
Thank you, Rawlson. Yeah, very good points. Next, we'll go to Carolyn.
Great, thank you very much. I'll be brief because I'm mindful of our time here, I think. So I guess first of all, our group wanted to thank the city presentations of people making presentations, because clearly they were demonstrating a pretty high degree of granular knowledge of the communities, lots of detail. So that was very reassuring, I think, to the people in our group. They were very happy to see such a high level of knowledge about the community. So I'll just start out by saying that. I won't repeat some of the comments that have been made already, so I'll just focus on the incremental things. There was an appreciation and definitely a value for the longer term infrastructure plans as demonstrated through the transportation master plan. But I think there was also quite a strong feeling that we need to look at for short-term solutions, and perhaps those short-term solutions, there was reference to, I think, transitional solutions. 10 years or more to get things in place just seems like a long ways off, and I think we need to be a little bit more nimble. There was mention of what the NCC did on Queen Elizabeth Driveway very quickly during COVID to pivot. We need to be more open to that. We see it happening in other jurisdictions. Ottawa's done a bit of that, but I think there was definitely a sense that we need to do more of that. We can't afford to do everything all at once, obviously. So thinking about what we can do in the short term, and just being open to that. Studies are great, but there was sort of a few comments about a lot of discussion about what studies being done. That's good, but let's have a bit more of a can-do attitude. So that was one thing. I guess the other sort of big idea that I think was talked about, it ties into the last discussion about equity, but sort of from the other side of things was, well, I think everyone's interested in become more attuned to questions of equity. At the same time, if you don't have a continuous link built, someone said it's like going, you'll be riding your bike and it's like going from joy to terror and back again as you go through, different aspects of the link that have different levels of completion. So it's important to, and I think people make decisions to commute to work on their bike. Let's say if there's a complete link, and it can be a binary decision. So you either have the link or you don't, and if it's not complete, you don't. So having bits and pieces, the sort of dog's breakfast routine, because you're trying to be equitable, it's a challenge. It's a huge challenge, but I think there was a focus on choosing, trying to get at really investing in the links and then filling in the pieces rather than spreading it all around the wards, on a more sort of political basis, if I can put it that way. I think those are the main points. I'll let you get to the next group. Thank you.
I think those are very good. Really, thank you for that. And Rawlson will bring a motion to make Donald and Somerset pedestrian streets like the NCC Parkway. That's what I've learned from that group. I'm seeing folks nod. I'm just teasing. There's certainly a lot of thoughts that need to go into Somerset East and Donald Street. Rawlson, I'll throw it back to you.
And I'll call on Rob to provide a report.
Thank you, and apologies in advance. There is a crying 3-year-old in the background, so let me know if it's getting too loud and just mute me. So I'll go quickly. I'll be mindful of the time here. So I've got some general comments at the high level, and then we can move into some more strategic considerations in terms of new strategies. General comments, basically great that infrastructure is being built, but there were concerns in our group about maintenance keeping up with the pace of new builds. Our group, by the way, was a mix of pedestrians and cyclists, and the comments reflect that. On the subject of accessibility, that came up, the idea being accessibility, especially during winter months, and in particular, access to things like Beechwood as a winter maintained bike corridor, or access to the Odawa Bridge via bike. Another topic that came up was back to infrastructure. Marier in particular was seen to be in rough shape with a large pothole. Sidewalks, there's a question of the equitable distribution of sidewalks, especially around Beechwood from Vanier to Beechwood Cemetery, Vanier Parkway to Beechwood Cemetery. Comments on safety around the École Mauriel Bélanger. And so there's some areas where cyclists are basically entering areas with high traffic, and so concerns about safety there. Moving on to new strategies. Basically, one idea was for the city to start going beyond thoroughfares. The idea was that there's a lot of good east-west connections. What are those additional linkages that we can put in so that more people are choosing other mobility options and kind of trying to bike or to walk instead of drive? So what are the connecting points that we can institute at a strategic level? Another one was safety as an overall strategy, and I know that there's already stuff in the road safety action plan, but idea being that we could benefit from an overall safety awareness campaign. Related point was around the improvement on education around usage and the interaction of cyclists and pedestrians. How to use your bell, how to keep distance from dog walkers, what to do when you have a dog, et cetera, et cetera. So helping with those interactions. And then in terms of ideas, there was a reflection on the amazing use of the outdoor repair stand that has been popping up, and encouraged to do more of that. And concerns around bike theft and ideas around possible bike theft reduction strategies. Everything from embedding chips to poverty reduction as a strategy to mitigate bike theft. So big broad range of conversation. Happy to send more detailed notes if you'd like.
That's excellent. I think that's really going to help feed into the inputs that we need to really generate a ward-based strategy for Ward 13 around cycling and pedestrian links. So I'm really gratified for that, and I would look forward to more information. We're seeing a tremendous amount of information that's coming through the chat, and that I also want people to know, once again, that is being captured for the reports that we're gonna put together. So I'll pass it back over to Matt.
And Rawlson, I'm giving a high five to Rob on the screen here, keeping composure with kid in the back. I've been there. We've all been there over Zoom with the various situation. There'd be a dog, a cat, a crying baby, internet connection. So kudos to you, Rob, and certainly appreciate your engagement and leadership here. I think maybe you can correct me, Rawlson, but I believe our last moderator is Daniel. Daniel, I'm not seeing you on the screen. Are you able to?
Yeah, I'm here.
Perfect. Go ahead.
Okay. So in our group, the main concern that came through right at the beginning was Cummings Bridge, and the data that was available that said that there was low accident incidents. The person mentioned if it's too unsafe to cycle there, there's going to be less accidents because no one wants to go there in the first place. So the comment was, it's very skewed. That shouldn't be the data you should use to determine. There has to be better ways of determining if Cummings Bridge is a valuable crossing. Also, that the sharrows are just no longer welcome. Traffic is just too fast to me to share a lane with them. And then the comment was to, reduce it to 3 lanes. And how do we do that? One of the comments was, how do we actually get that done? So then we moved into comments regarding vehicles in bike lanes, parking in bike lanes, and that the comment was, one of the responses was that protected bike lanes are the solution to this. If it's segregated, then cars don't park in them as often. We still see them, but it's reduced. And on top of that, a comment came from a member of the community that said, Bilo actually called him because he was making too many complaints about cars blocking the bike lanes. So he was concerned that, how is that fair that, I'm just telling you what's happening, but I'm getting in trouble because I'm talking about it too often, even though it is actually happening that often. So that was one of the comments that was made. Also for the Cummings Bridge, that there needs to be an increase to safety in the winter, either using paint or something, but some consideration needs to be given to safety for cyclists and pedestrians in the winter. And that the LRT pathway should connect to the Mackenzie King. The proper connection should be done. And that there were still concerns regarding Montreal Road. I guess the hopeful is the project in the future that will fix the safety concerns for pedestrians and cyclists, but that people still felt unsafe going in that area. And that Donald's is an important connection as a result of the bridge at the end that needs to be considered. That's it.
Thank you, Daniel. And whoever said the comment on bylaw, if bylaw calls you again to say that, or if you have an officer's name, please reach out to me directly. We encourage you to engage in our city, and as you provide feedback, if there is a pushback, I can assure you that both Rawlson and I will gladly involve ourselves. So want to encourage you to report. Here it happens to be cycling, but any issues that you're seeing in our community to 311. And if you're not getting the results, please contact our teams directly. Rawlson, I'll turn it over to you. I'm not sure if I've missed anyone.
I think you've really pointed out all the moderators. I think we've gone through all the moderators.
I think Chris Greenshill is saying group 7. Chris. Oh, Aaron, yeah. I forgot my own team member. Aaron, I apologize. Aaron, could you?
7 screens in, that's why.
That's all right. Yeah, I'll go quickly. We had a group who was focused more at Vanier, Overbrook, and Sandy Hill area, and we focused more on walking. There were some interesting things brought up about how there needs to be more cohesion with kind of the planning development side and what kind of infrastructure is put in to meet the needs of new residents in those communities. There was some kind of specific projects that were brought up. There also seems to be some, I guess, issues or impediments with city processes. I think it's been mentioned before in kind of accomplishing some of the active transportation goals. We also had an interesting conversation about kind of climate change initiatives, whether it's trees, like shade, landscaping goals to make areas more walkable. We also talked about 15-minute neighborhoods, kind of ensuring people have a place to walk to, whether it's a coffee shop, a grocery store, having kind of a destination. And then we talked a little bit about cycling, mostly talked about safety, having a separated lane or a barrier, but also talked about ensuring that there's parking for cyclists at their destination.
I think that's an excellent synopsis. And I think we have run through our moderators and noting we're reaching nearly the 9 o'clock hour and we have parents on the line with small children. I think we should start the wrap-up process. But I think clearly some of the messages that I'm hearing from you is a real emphasis on safety, which I appreciate. Like I said, being an active pedestrian in my neighborhood, I appreciate hearing the need around safety, the need around real infrastructure investments, as well as a more integrated interlinked network, which is one of the reasons why Matt and myself said this was going to be the better strategy, holding a town hall that really addresses the challenges in both of our wards, and to hear the challenges with that interconnectivity, so that we can work towards developing a cycling strategy that really promotes better infrastructure, better safety elements, and interconnectivity. So I think that those are my main takeaways. And like I said, my staff, primarily Stephanie Johnson in my office, who deals with transportation issues in my office, will be leading a mini report that we will publish based on the content here that will really look at moving towards an active transportation strategy within the ward.
Oh, Rawlson, I see Jerry's raised his hand, so maybe we can go to him before. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to make a very quick comment that you don't need to have a destination to be a cyclist or a pedestrian. And you're just out there. It's a journey. You're going on a journey to a park, but you're maybe just going out for a walk around the block because you need to get fresh air and that. So I would be cautious about always saying you need a destination. You're being encouraging activity, and it doesn't always have to be to go to a grocery store.
Very good point.
I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Jerry. Alors, je ne prendrai pas beaucoup plus de temps, simplement pour vous remercier. On a eu, j'écrivais une quarantaine de commentaires là, juste du regroupement des séances. It's very, very useful. We're going to pull the questions that you pre-submitted. We're going to pull the discussions that was today, what's in the chat. Rawlson and I will do our ward specific and what we can bring to the city as part of the TMP review. We can't do that alone. We can't do that without you. We want to thank first and foremost our community association, our community groups, Ecology Ottawa, Bike Ottawa, Walkable Ottawa, the Coalition for Disabilities. Rawlson, it's always a pleasure to work with you, and it's great to see both of our communities turnout and engagement this evening. So, and I do want to tip my hat off to city staff as well, who've been able to join us and presented tonight's session. I hope that the forum did work so that you could meaningfully engage, so that it could continue and begin to spark strategic conversations between our communities and with the city. So we're excited. This is there's been a lot of elements that got us here. There's a tremendous window of opportunity as the city plans to develop the TMP. And we will keep you engaged. We will keep you involved. And the engagement this evening is only one of the important starting points. So, encore une fois, please stay safe. Please continue to engage following the session. If more ideas have come to be, feel free to write in. We'll include that in our package. And again, thank you for taking the time this evening. It's much appreciated.
And I'd like to just echo what Matt said. I'd like to thank our community associations, residents coming out. Thank you for taking the time and providing the necessary input to us to really improve active transportation infrastructure. And I also really want to thank staff for the wonderful presentation that they provided and the insights that they provided in the work that they do every day to try and really improve the infrastructure as well. So thank you all for attending. And I hope everybody has a wonderful evening.
Thank you to our moderators. I could forget. Thank you to our moderators as well. Much appreciated. Stay safe, everyone.
Take care, everybody.